Right, Charlie, what is your third tip for us, please?
Yeah, sure. So my third tip, this is, I mentioned in the beginning that I hope these tips would build on each other. So we've got the behaviour, we've got the warmth. My next tip is to do with your actual classroom teaching, what you're doing in front of the kids, I think, to try and get the most out of them. Now, I also said this was going to be something that I didn't do well in the beginning, and that's certainly true of this one. This tip is to ask the whole class questions. Now, I'll go into what exactly I mean by that. What I mean by this is very high frequency whole class AFL. Now, that can be using a number of different bits of AFL. The things we really like using at Michaela are mini whiteboards. We use turn to your partner, which is a form of partner talk. We use heads down, hands up. We use call and response. I would say those are the main ways that we do it. There are probably others that I'm forgetting, but let me just go briefly into a couple of those. So I'm sure loads of people use mini whiteboards, and mini whiteboards are a really fantastic way just to quickly see what everyone's got in their head. And actually, for the moment, we can just think about mini whiteboards when I'm explaining the broader principle here, which is, why am I saying to get the whole class answering questions? It's because you really want to have the highest proportion of kids possible at any one moment engaged with the lesson. And any sort of whole class AFL forces kids to be thinking and participating in what it is you're doing. If you are constantly asking, and this is 100% a mistake I've made before, if you're constantly asking just hands up questions and then choosing pupils, you run the risk of only a few pupils, and in particular, only the pupil you're asking, really thinking hard about the question you've asked. And you also obviously are gathering a bad data set on what the class really are thinking and what they understand. If you speak to one pupil, your data point is one. You know that one pupil, you know what they think. You don't know what anyone else in the room thinks. Now, whiteboards, which I assume lots of people have used before, are an obvious way of doing this. If you're asking a question and all the pupils hold up a board, and this is a bit math specific, I understand in other subjects it might not be useful, but you can very quickly see, and you've got much better data now on what all the class are thinking. And not only do you have better data on what all the class are thinking, you forced every single pupil in the room to think and to present an answer. And for us at Michaela, that's huge, because what we have is we have good behaviour, so pupils will sit and they will just appear to be listening. But the pupils, you know, they are real people, and I don't blame them for this. I'd be the same if I was them. They get very, very good at just sitting and looking like they're thinking without doing any thinking at all. So it forces them into thinking, it forces them into participating, and then they're getting more out of the lesson. Now, whiteboards, I think, is a reasonably obvious one. There is also, I mentioned turn to your partner talk. I'll just briefly describe that. So we will say to the kids, for example, well, let's just choose a random question. Say, what is the lowest common multiple here and why? Tell your partner, go. Now, what they do is they'll turn to the... Ooh, I just hit my mic. They will turn to the person next to them. I got so excited. And they will start speaking straight away, you know, explaining what it is they think and why. And that's normally... and the reason I include the and why there is because that is normally a question you'd ask that had a couple of sentences, explanation that you want them to express to their partner. And then after just a few seconds, and I must stress this because I feel like in lots of other schools, you would then have the kids talking and talking and talking for ages. We don't have that. It's very controlled, it's very sharp, it's very energetic. So the pupils turn, they speak to each other for just, you know, 5, maybe 10 seconds, more like 5 seconds. And then you're saying, right, back to me, 3, 2, 1, hands up. And the pupils turn back to you, they put their hands in the air, and they're ready to answer your question straight away. And what that means is that you can keep the pace high, you can keep the rhythm of the lesson going, you can not lose focus, but you've just had every single pupil in the class express something to the person next to them. It's so great for raising the energy of the room, it's great for getting everyone participating, it's great for getting the kids expressing their opinions and communicating with one another in a way that's also controlled and doesn't derail the lesson.
Can I just ask on that, Charlie? Because we've had a few guests talk about mini whiteboards, but this is the first time we're really digging into other forms of whole class assessment, so I'm really interested in this. The partner talk, if this isn't a stupid question, if they're just discussing for kind of 5 or 10 seconds, do you have a protocol of who kind of speaks first? Because I can imagine they're kind of just shouting at each other, trying to get in as quick as possible. How does that play out?
Yeah, it's a good question. That does vary a bit by the room you're in, actually. I would say that there's no hard and fast rule that we have here. When we notice that there are pupils who are being kind of deliberately opting out of that partner talk, and you've done well to spot that, because that is something that happens, what we'll tend to do is say, we have in all of our classrooms at Michaela, there's a window side and a door side, and what we'll say is window side first, go, or door side first, go. You know, and that just, if you're going to manage the turns, that's a really good way to do that. It's not something that we really strictly enforce, but it's a way of overcoming what you've just described.
Got it. And just so I can get the logistics of this right, so they've done that, you know, quick chat to their partner, quick explanation, then they turn back, and what's the purpose of the hands up? Is that just so you can see who's ready, or is that hands up if you're in a position to explain? What's the hands up bit for?
Yeah, the hands up is just to say who wants to contribute at that moment. Now, lower down the school, I would say at Michaela we have a pretty high insistence on very high levels of participation, so we're expecting there to be a lot of hands in the air at that moment. And because, as I've mentioned before, that's the culture everywhere, you do then just see pretty much every hand in the room shooting straight up. And, you know, if you think about it, there's no reason that shouldn't be happening, because they've just turned and said something to their partner. Either they've heard something from their partner, or they've said something, they've had a moment to think about it. Really, they can be participating in that moment, and it's good to have them doing that, so their hands are shooting up. Now, higher up the school that you get, I will admit that to maintain that level of kind of enthusiasm from the kids isn't always possible as they get a bit older and, you know, more teenagery. So you might not get every single hand in the air shooting straight up, but you'll get a good number of kids raising their hand to participate, and that's your chance then to choose someone to speak.
And why, again, this sounds like I'm being a real awkward question here, Charlie, I'm just fascinated. Why the hands up? Why not just kind of cold call people at that stage? What's the benefit of kind of the kids who want to explain, if that makes sense? Why not pick somebody who, you know, because then you kind of get that bias sample again.
Yeah, true. I would say that we do cold call as well. So there'll be a mixture. So sometimes you'll take a kid with a hand up. Sometimes you'll say 3, 2, 1 and just say a kid's name straight away. So you're right to raise that. It's a very good point. We will often cold call. I would say that the general rule of hands up is there because it drives a sense of energy and participation in a lesson. So what we get is that sense of energy, participation, of not opting out, but without having to always choose a hand. Obviously, as a teacher, you do what you think is right in that moment, and you just choose a kid.
Got it. Perfect. Was there anything else about the paired you wanted to discuss before we move on to the other one, Charlie?
About the partner talk?
Yeah.
No, I think that was everything.
No, perfect. Right, I'm intrigued by this next one. How did you say it? Heads down was involved at some point, right? Tell me about this.
Yeah, sure. So that's when this is a kind of blind sampling, a blind survey. Right. So what it is we'll say heads down, and the kids know in that moment, because it happens everywhere and they've been drilled on it since year 7. They'll just put their heads on the desk, and then they'll put their hand on top of their head, and you'll read out a few options. It's a multiple choice thing, and they'll just open their hand for the correct answer. It's just a way of avoiding the kids seeing each other's answers and getting a kind of more honest sample of what they think the answer is. Now, just a small tip on this, it can be a good idea actually to have gone through the options before you get them to put their heads down, because I don't know, you might have tried this before, but the kids very quickly go to sleep if they've got their heads down for too long. So it'll be something along the lines of, here's the question, is it X, is it Y, is it Z? Right, heads down. The first option is also a good one to say, I don't know, because you want to avoid kind of false positives. So often my first option is, I don't know, not sure. Thanks for the honesty. Okay, do you think it's X? Do you think it's Y? Do you think it's Z? The kids are just opening their fist without making too much noise, so you can see who thinks what without them letting each other know. And then you very quickly heads up again, and you carry on with the lesson. And it's a lot like turn to your partner. I really must stress that this happens very quickly. It's very punchy. There isn't wasted time. You just get on with the lesson. It's a quick sample, and you move on.
And I assume it's the kind of thing where if you sense that, you can see from the responses there's a lack of understanding in the room, you can stop and intervene. But if everyone seems to know what's going on, you just cracking straight on. Would that be how it would play out?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, it's then up to you as a teacher how you want to interpret and use that data, but it just gives you a better reflection of what the kids think. And, I know, Craig, you're someone who's an expert at multiple choice questions. So, the better you can make the options, then the more data you're going to get from that. Now, of course, in the moment, you might be making this up off the top of your head and you're not going to be able to create some fantastic, false options. I'm sure there's a phrase for that I can't remember. But, so it can be a bit more rough and ready than one that you had maybe written on paper beforehand. And the thing with all of this whole class AFL that I'm describing, all the methods, the thing that they're all doing, as I said in the beginning, is they're forcing the kids to think, they're forcing the kids all to participate, and they are also increasing the sense of energy and kind of oomph in the room because of the variation. If pupils are in one moment turning to their partner, the next moment they're grabbing their board to raise it up, the next moment their head's on the desk, they're just doing different things, and it creates that feeling of variation and kind of urgency and energy that you need in a room. If you're teaching kids maths all day long, and the thing with the kids is that they concentrate so hard, particularly I'm sure this might be true of all pupils, but particularly at Michaela, they're concentrating so hard all day long. And in order to kind of get what we need out of them in terms of energy, we need them to be kind of chivied along through the lesson, and that's one way of doing it.
It's absolutely fascinating, this. And just on that multiple choice point, you're absolutely right, Charlie. When I use diagnostic questions, a major problem of this is you get what I call the tactical delay. You'll say, okay, right, 3, 2, 1, show me your answers, and I tend to use A, B, C, D cards or mini whiteboards. But you'll get kids who'll purposely just hold fire just so they can see what their mate's gone for, and then they go, oh yeah, okay, right, I'll go for A as well. But I really like this heads down as a way just to kind of eradicate the tactical delay all at once, so you're not getting this biased sample that was the whole reason that we're asking the whole class. So I love that. What was the fourth one there, Charlie? So we have the whiteboards, we have the partner talk, we have the hands down. Was there one more strategy you mentioned?
Yeah. So the last one is what we call and response. I'm sure people might have heard of this before. All we mean by that at Michaela is we'll ask a question and then we'll say 1, 2, 3. And the kids know when they hear 1, 2, 3, then they all shout out the answer at the same time. Now, where this is at its best is really for one word answers. So often in math, it's one number answers. Imagine that the answer is, 2. Then, you would just say, okay, what does everyone think is the answer, or what's the answer to this? And then you just pause you would pause for a few moments there, because you don't rush into the 1, 2, 3. You ask, what's the answer? Pause for a few seconds, let everyone think. You want to build that kind of feeling in the room, the sense that everyone knows. You might be having lots of hands in the air at that point, and then you say the 1, 2, 3, and they all just shout out the answer. Now, this is obviously it's less accurate data than whiteboards and even heads down, because it's noisier. You can't necessarily hear what every pupil has said exactly, but it does, the volume that comes back at you does give you a sense of what the room is thinking and feeling, and you might, even if you're lucky, hear a couple of individual pupils say the wrong thing. That does happen to me, and then you can correct that and you've got that data. But again, a lot of the main function of that tool is to make everyone think, get everyone participating, increase the energy.
I really like these, Charlie. So I love the 4 options. I really like the point about variety and getting the energy going in the room and so on. And my final question just on this is, do you see any kind of trend in terms of these 4 and how you use them, in terms of the older kids you tend to use one more than the other, or does it? Is there any trend in terms of the achievement levels of the kids, where with a lower achieving set you might use one more than the other, or are there no patterns like that?
No, it's a good question. I would say there are certainly patterns. I would say, I was discussing this with the teacher just the other day, that often whiteboards we find are actually particularly good for the lower ability pupils, for the lower sets. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because you don't want to end up, so both lower ability and younger pupils here, you don't want to end up with a situation where the pupils are writing for really, really long times on their whiteboards, unless you are then using it as a kind of checkpoint question. And I feel like I have never-ending tactics here. What I mean by checkpoint question is that the pupils show you their board and you're immediately telling them, yeah, that's great, you're moving on to an exercise. So that's often a way I'll use whiteboards as a kind of checkpoint into an exercise from kind of teacher explanation. I would say, as a general piece of advice, if you're not using it as a checkpoint question and the kids aren't immediately going on to something once they've shown you their board, then you don't want them writing for a long time on their board, because what happens is some of them finish reasonably quickly, they hold up their board, and then they are just stuck there waiting for everyone to catch up. So whiteboards work really well for quicker, shorter, maybe slightly easier questions if you're not then bouncing straight onto something else, and that tends to be obviously the lower ability and the younger pupils who are doing those easier questions. Now you can obviously on boards as well not do a whole question on your board. Something that I've only just recently got better at is getting pupils to do just parts of question on their board. What's the next line of working, what's the next, what number goes here, what unit goes here, and they're just showing you that, and that keeps everything bouncing along at a better rhythm, I'd say, than when you get bogged down in, okay, answer this huge great question on your board.
Fantastic. And with the older kids then, what would it be more, which of those 4 strategies would they be using?
Yeah, I would say it is the case that the partner talk becomes slightly better as the kids get older and more advanced, because then what the pupils are saying to each other is actually sort of better. It's more eloquent, it's better maths, it's more likely to be right. When you ask a bottom set Year 7 pupil to turn to the person next to them and to explain something, that it needs to be a very simple question, or they're just going to just say, a load of lovely nonsense that doesn't make any sense. So, whereas a top set, Year 11 pupil might genuinely have something quite, mathematically interesting to say to the person next to them. So I would say that partner talk is one that increases in use with age and ability.
It's brilliant. Fascinating, this, Charlie.